Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to another nonfiction book review. If you watched my BookTube movie video, I mentioned, didn't I, how I'm always late, right? And how I don't often read newly released books. I was disparaging myself, but when I reconsidered, I can see that there are actually some benefits to holding back. One of those benefits is critical hindsight. I don't mean my critical hindsight, but other people's. If a book is published in the 1990s and I don't read it until now, I get the benefit of so much professional critical insight online, and that can inform my reading in a way that it couldn't have done when the book was first published. In the case of nonfiction, of course, there'll probably by this time be follow-up reading, which will be talking about the same subject, but approaching it from a completely different perspective. Now, the book we'll look at today is one that I could have purchased when it first came out in 1997, but I'm actually glad that I waited until 2023. So today's book is Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. This paperback edition is 480 pages, although the actual text itself is 425. I'm going to go straight to the first question. Could I summarize this book? Diamond has surveyed human social development. He's concentrating on what is known about the earliest humans, how they adapted to life on the different continents, and what he was trying to do was come up with some kind of satisfactory set of reasons that would explain why different peoples developed differently. I'm going to read from the back cover of my 2005 edition. Quote, "This book answers the most obvious, the most important, yet the most difficult question about human history. Why history unfolded so differently on different continents. Geography and biogeography, not race, molded the contrasting fates of Europeans, Asians, Native Americans, Sub-Saharan Africans, and Aboriginal Australians." I put a stress there on not race, and that's because I'm curious whether that 2005 cover write-up was attempting already to counter the critical response, the critical concern that was coming in 8 years after the book was published. People were worried that Diamond might be simplifying history, or that he was restating geodeterministic ideas that had been used in the past to justify racism. Diamond also, it's interesting, he must have been just as concerned because he devoted a whole page on his personal website to answering the critical reaction to that one book. By the way, I'll leave a link to that website below in the description box if you'd like to check that out. There are also a number of places in the text where Diamond, he takes time to argue against taking a racist interpretation of his work. But there you see, that's the benefit of reading Guns, Germs, and Steel in 2023. See, you're completely aware of this atmosphere of anxiety about the ideas and how they might be interpreted with regard to race. And as well, there was also the concern that Jared's book, because it was so popular and aimed at a popular audience, that readers who, like me, we don't have a great deal of specialist understanding of geology or geography or archaeology or anthropology, that we might read his book and just treat it as fact. Well, again, that's where it's fantastic to come to the book late, because you approach it completely differently when you're aware of all this online atmosphere. This critical, anxious sort of, I'm not sure that was a good idea to write that book. You go into the book very prepared to hear Diamond's ideas, but at the same time, you're holding them lightly. Other concepts may be available. In fact, other concepts may be available and in your Amazon wish list for you to read later, right? Question 2. What is known about the author? Jared Diamond was born in Boston in 1937. He was the son of a physician and a concert pianist. So that's an interesting mixture of science and arts. And maybe that says something about his personality, because when he was a Harvard undergraduate, he didn't specialize at that point. Let me just read the list of classes that he took. This mix includes music composition, Russian, German, epic poetry, and the American Revolution. Now, he did settle down and decide on a specialism when he went on to Cambridge, and he received his doctorate in physiology. He went traveling for a few years, came back to the United States in 1962, and thought he was going to settle down and specialize in the physiology of the gallbladder. But I heard him admit in a podcast interview that as soon as he had to narrow the focus of his attention to that very small subject, he didn't find it satisfying. So in 1964, he began the first of many trips to New Guinea to study the ecology, the bird life in particular, and, simultaneously he became interested in the people. Guns, Germs, and Steel was Diamond's attempt to answer a question that he was asked by a local politician in New Guinea. Why is it that white people have this incredible variety of material things compared to, himself, the politician from New Guinea? Now, Jared Diamond is currently the professor of geography at the University of California in Los Angeles. Question 3. How is the book structured? Diamond divides this book into 4 parts. Parts 1 and 2, they build a portrait of the very earliest humans, so we're not talking about coming any closer to the present day than 7,000 BC. It's a huge period of time. And when I thought about it, I don't think any other author had written about that subject for a non-specialist audience. And that probably explains the popularity of the book when it first came out, but also explains the specialist concern, the critical concern, because of course in the absence of any other ideas being presented to the general public, people might take the book as fact. Diamond uses parts 1 and 2 to demonstrate how geography influenced the choices available to early humans. So how and where they would move, what plants were available to be gathered or to be cultivated, and how easy those plants were to cultivate, and also what animals were available to be hunted or domesticated. Part 3 then contains essays that really zero in on the title words, guns, germs, and steel. He looks at germs, how disease differed between groups of humans and why that was. Regarding guns and steel, Diamond looks at technology more broadly. So he's examining the factors that influence the development of writing, how human inventiveness works, how it leads to new technology, and why some human societies become more complex politically. And then part 4 is a synthesis. He's trying to bring together everything that he's spoken about in the previous chapters, and he takes you on a world tour where he stops, he starts in Australia, and he just looks at the Aboriginal Australians and how they made the choices they did, how they got to Australia and how they made the choices they did and developed the life that they did. Question 4. Why did I choose to read this book? Well, I think I said it's a book I'm pretty sure that I heard about the year it was published. I've always been into podcasts, so I'm pretty sure I heard Jared Diamond being interviewed, and of course I was so attracted to the idea of getting a better understanding about early humans because nobody, as I said, nobody had written about it before. I think what really attracted me, though, may have been Jared Diamond made me aware that we'd been a bit misinformed, surprise, surprise, when I went to school in the 1970s, misinformed about the number of indigenous Americans who were infected by diseases like smallpox and other types of illnesses that Europeans had developed some immunity to because of regular contact with domestic animals. And so Jared Diamond corrects that and says, even before Europeans made actual settlements in North America, they'd made just enough visits to spread those germs and begin epidemics which traveled right across North America and took devastating numbers of people, such that when Europeans actually arrived to settle, the numbers that then subsequently died from diseases then were much smaller because there had already been very, very, very high numbers of deaths. It was in the millions. It was yeah, there's no word to describe what it felt like reading that. And knowing that neither the Europeans, because they didn't understand the diseases themselves then, they hadn't learned to cure them, that nobody really would have realized that would have been a problem. Post-COVID, we're all hyper aware of just how easy it is to spread germs just from the moisture that comes from your breath. Next question. How did you get this book and how much did it cost? Well, it cost nothing because I borrowed this book from my local library, very small library, but run by a group of enthusiastic and dedicated volunteers, which includes the person who normally watches television in this room, right? I don't know if any of them actually look at BookTube, but even so, I just wanted to give them a shout out and say, hey, job well done, everybody. Question 6. Have I encountered anything unexpected or interesting? I have had a lot of assumptions corrected. I've already mentioned the smallpox. Things I've been taught in school, bits of popular knowledge, you know how it is. This is just one example from chapter 13. It was so surprising that I kept interrupting the person who watches television in this room. I was interrupting their television viewing to read them sections out loud. Diamond puts forward some examples to show that inventions they're cumulative. They're not some kind of heroic product of a single genius mind, even though that's how we kind of presented it in school, isn't it? I'm reading out loud now from chapter 244, page 244. Quote, "We are regularly told James Watt invented the steam engine in 1769, supposedly inspired by watching steam rise from a tea kettle's spout." And I'm interrupting the quote now to say, yep, that's what I was taught. That's what the person who watches television in this room was also taught. Right, continuing the quote. "Unfortunately for this splendid fiction, Watt actually got the idea for his particular steam engine while repairing a model of Thomas Newcomen's steam engine, which Newcomen had invented 57 years earlier. Newcomen's engine, in turn, followed the steam engine that the Englishman Thomas Savery patented in 1698, which followed the steam engine that the Frenchman Denis Papin designed, but did not build, around 1680, which, in turn, had precursors in the ideas of Dutch scientist Christian Huygens and others." End quote. Wow, it would have been really useful to know this earlier, that invention is accumulative and that people can discover something without knowing what to do with that discovery, or the culture around them doesn't really know how they're going to utilize that discovery. There were many, many other examples in the chapter. I found them all so valuable because they showed that failure is more common than success, by far. But failure, really, it's only failure if you look at it in terms of one person's lifetime. If you look at it over several lifetimes, then what you are seeing, it becomes clear that what's actually happening is stages toward success. Question 7. Is there anything readers should be prepared for if they decide to read this book? I do want to compliment Jared Diamond on his writing style. He achieves, in my humble opinion, the right balance between stating facts carefully, the way an academic specialist or a scientist should, and then communicating information in a way that us poor non-specialists, well, we can still understand. But all that said, when I reached part 3, it began to seem as though the number of questions and the difference in all the topics that Diamond was tackling just to come up with this synthesis, that it had reached a critical mass, by which I mean there was less page space being devoted to topics that could be whole books in themselves. I found that I was reading comparisons which didn't fully explain themselves, and yeah, there were times when that made me a little wary. So to some degree, I do sympathize with Diamond's critics and their concerns. It's impossible for me, the lay reader, to know if Diamond is or isn't leaving out important information that might contradict his analysis overall. I hesitate to use the word glib because Diamond is not glib. Yet it felt as if information was coming at me a little too quick and a little too fast, and that always raises the suspicion that depth of thought might be compromised. I think the reader is safe if they are aware that the study of human development is ongoing. It does not end with guns, germs, and steel. Jared Diamond is very careful to restate this throughout the book. But he also has an engaging way of presenting his findings, and so I could see how an inexperienced reader, it'd be easy for them to forget that his theories are just theories. Question 8. Anything else that is interesting to know about this book? Diamond does devote 29 pages near the end for further reading recommendations, and he divides that up into sections that correspond to the book chapter. So if you were interested, say, in chapter 12 that talks about the development of writing, and you wanted to verify something that was said in Guns, Germs, and Steel, then you go to the back and there's 20 related books, half a dozen journal articles, just about the specialist study of writing systems. Question 9. Any ideas for related follow-up reading? Well, thankfully, because we've waited all this time, there are now other books on human development targeting non-specialist audiences since Guns, Germs, and Steel first appeared. And those titles, they either deal critically directly with Diamond's work, or they offer a completely alternative perspective on the subject of human development. You might already be aware of Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, but earlier there was a geography specialist called Blaut, B-L-A-U-T, who wrote The Colonizer's Model of the World, Geographical Diffusionism, and Eurocentric History. Now, it's a fairly pricey book. I think it was about 24, 25 pounds sterling, but it does offer a direct challenge to Diamond's ideas from a geography specialist if you do want to have that counter viewpoint. I will leave details of both those books in the description box below. So, to sum up, right, what have I got in my notes? Diamond, he uses this phrase, arbitrarily delineated stages, at one point in the book. And I don't think he would object if I described Guns, Germs, and Steel as the attempt of one educated person to assemble some arbitrarily delineated factors and apply those factors broadly to the study of human development. But, you know, arbitrary, it's the nature of all nonfiction writing, really. Any author who does a nonfiction book is trying to make sense of a complex subject, and they do so with faith that the reading audience is savvy enough to know that some questions can never be finally, fully answered. And that's another book review done. Huh. I have one last coffee break video to record in my DNF, Do Not Finish Meditations series. That's probably what's going to appear on this channel next. And then we will follow that with a fiction review of the novel Erasure by Percival Everett. Please click the like button if you enjoyed this video, and click subscribe if you want notifications about what is coming up next. Thanks very much for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.